Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for a presentation of Living Your Best Life with Hearing Loss with Susanna Dussling. First, I want to thank Whitney Riley for providing CART this evening. Whitney is with Caption Source. Thank you very much, Whitney. Tonight, you'll see a couple of things. One will be polls. We're going to ask you a couple of questions to keep everybody in the audience on their toes. So when you see those, you'll just click your screen and we'll be able to see the results in real time. Hopefully the technology will cooperate with me on this. And if you have questions for Susanna, please feel free to post those in the Q&A on the menu. And at the end of her presentation, I'll go ahead and voice those so that they become part of our transcript as well. Just want to remind everybody that the webinar is recorded. And I will have the recording posted hopefully by the end of the week, but I always say give me a week to get it up on our website, and then you can share it with friends and family and coworkers and so forth, or just watch it again because you thought it was so great. Without further ado, Susanna, I'm going to go ahead and let you get started.
Living your best life with hearing loss. My name is Susanna Dussling. I am a keynote speaker, trainer, and I am an author. Nancy, can you please click next slide? Today, I'm going to give you an overview before we begin. I'm going to share my story with you, a very brief version. I'm going to talk about attitude, how attitude is very important. And most of us with hearing loss are always struggling with effective communication strategies. I'm going to talk about communication strategies in the school and the workplace. Not only do we communicate in school and the workplace, we also communicate with family and friends and in social environments. And I will definitely talk about the telephone and how even with hearing loss, we can have an active life. This is where you get to post your questions, and I'm going to answer them. And then finally, I'm going to conclude our presentation. I'm really excited to be here this evening. I hope by sharing some of my experiences and my tips with you that'll help you in your life as a hard of hearing person, whether you wear hearing aids, cochlear implants, or just use assistive listening devices. Next. My story. Well, this story begins many, 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 many years ago in the 60s. Now, think about it just for a moment. This is back in the day when we did not have the internet. We did not have text messaging. We only had the telephone, and we did not have computers. In other words, we were not exposed to all this information that's out there today. I was born in the 60s. And my mom and dad were concerned when at the age of 3, I was having a much difficult time of speaking. I was a very outgoing child. I loved to play and I loved to talk. But once again, my mom was concerned about my speech. So she took me to the doctor. And that first doctor said, there's nothing wrong with Susanna. She's just a slow learner. Thank goodness my mom did not believe in a first opinion. So she got a second opinion. And then that doctor diagnosed me with having hearing loss. I was born with profound hearing loss. In other words, I had about 70% loss in my left ear and about 80% loss in my right ear. It's sensorineural hearing loss. The doctor gave my mom and dad very, very important information, and I am so thankful for that second doctor, that he told my mom, even though I had hearing loss, that I should live a life like most other children. And mom was like, okay. So I began to wear hearing aids at the age of 3. I hated hearing aids at first. I used to rip them out of my head. But then I eventually realized that I began to hear with my hearing aids. And my mom and dad believed in me having as much of a normal childhood as possible. So I was mainstreamed. I went to regular public schools, graduated from high school, went on to college. The biggest challenge when I had when I was going to school was not so much my actual hearing loss, but I had more of a pronounced, if you would like to call it, a deaf speech when I was a hearing aid user. I am a cochlear implant wearer now, and I'll get to that story in just a minute. And communication challenges were the biggest challenge. And of course, a little bit of bullying, but nothing, life-threatening or whatnot. I just had a very strong personality, and my mom taught me to defend myself. Like I mentioned, I graduated from high school. I graduated at the top of my class. I had a great childhood. I went off to college. I was a first-generation college student in my family. And then I was blessed. I made a dream come true, and I worked on board the Love Boat. Do we remember Captain Stubing and Julie McCoy? So I had a great time. I worked on board several cruise lines, several cruise ships for a few years, and then I realized it was time to come back to the real world. And I thought to myself, well, I enjoy clothing and fashion, and I got my college degree in merchandising with a minor in marketing. I began a career in retail management. I worked for many major department store chains as a manager, area sales manager, assistant store manager, big name companies. Everything was going great. When I wasn't at work, I enjoyed showing and training horses. That was my stress buster when I wasn't at work. Then in 2005 is when my life changed. I had 3 stories, 3 days that changed my life tremendously. It was in 2005, the summer of June 2005, and I went into work hearing. I was an area sales manager for, like I said, a leading department store chain. I went into work hearing, and I left work not being able to hear. In other words, I went completely deaf. And I thought to myself, oh, that's my new hearing aids acting up. I just bluffed my way through the rest of that day at work because, like I said, I had a pretty big, important job, and I thought it was my hearing aids acting up. As I was driving home, all kinds of thoughts were going through my mind. I was thinking, oh, my gosh, how am I going to hear my nephew say, Aunt Susanna, I love you? How was I going to hear the horse show announcer call the class? And how was I going to hear those crazy Houston drivers honking at me? I went to my mom and dad's house, and dad is very practical. He was like, we'll go to the audiologist the next day. They'll test your hearing, and he also thought it was my new hearing aid acting up. But I went into that big steel soundproof booth the next day, and I knew from the bottom of my heart when I stepped out of that booth that I was deaf, as in deaf, capital D, deaf, D-E-A-F, as in I could hear nothing out of both ears. That, to me, was more difficult than growing up as a hard of hearing person with hearing aids. Because when I went to check out, I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot hear the receptionist. I was kind of depressed for a whole week at work, but I'm an outgoing, happy-go-lucky person. I'm a single person. I support myself. My mom and dad are amazing people. They encouraged me. I went to the doctor, and we were like, okay, we'll get cochlear implants. But it wasn't an easy decision to make because I'm sure most of you know cochlear implants, once you receive them, is permanently embedded inside of you. I mean, you have cochlear implants. And for those of y'all that may have a little bit of hearing left, that the rest of your hearing is going to be gone after you have this operation. Well, like I had mentioned, I was diagnosed in June of 2005 of going completely deaf, and the technical word was sudden deafness. In other words, I went completely deaf in my left ear, no hearing, and at this point, it's true. My right ear, as you know, was progressive hearing loss. It was worse and worse. I had hardly any hearing left in my right ear. My right ear was never my listening ear for the telephone. My right ear with the hearing aid was just to help me to pick up sound. I could not understand speech. I still kept my job. The management staff obviously had to cut down my duties. I couldn't be the manager on duty because I couldn't hear. Anyway, fast forward 6 months later, I underwent the cochlear implant surgery. I got hooked up a month later, and I was devastated all over again because I could not hear with the cochlear implant. And I hope most of you know cochlear implants is not like turning on and off switch. I began to do a lot of listening exercises with my mom and dad, It took a long time, but I was determined because I wanted my life back. I wanted to be able to help the customers interact with family and friends and show horses. So we did these exercises, and over time I was able to hear with the cochlear implants, but it was very hard at work because of all the noise, but I prevailed. I had extremely severe tinnitus because it was noisy in the store. It sounded like a stuck doorbell was going off in my head. But once again, I prevailed. I did the listening exercises. Eventually, I'll never forget this day in my life. I was in my parents' living room, and I heard the distinctive tick-tock, tick-tock of the mantle clock for the first time in my life. Fast forward, love cochlear implants. 2011, I was let go from my job, and life has completely changed, and I decided it was time to go back to doing what I'm passionate about. I love motivating others. I got a master's degree in human resources development. I like teaching. I like training. I have my own furniture painting business, and I'm back riding horses again, and life is pretty good, and I'm here to share with you. And that is my introduction, and that's my story real briefly. And I'm going to let Nancy ask us some poll questions before I share about attitudes.
Okay, so you should see two questions on your screen. Do you feel like your hearing loss keeps you from living a meaningful and purposeful life? And do you struggle communicating with other people? This is fascinating to me that people can just choose an answer and we can see the responses so quickly. And so it does look like hearing loss really does have an impact on people's life and on their communicating with other people. It looks like probably everybody has answered. And so we can go on. Is that about what you expected to see, Susanna?
Yes.
Okay, interesting. Okay, well, hopefully you'll learn some tips here from Susanna on how to communicate or make it a little bit easier.
So, Nancy, did you get the results from the poll already?
Yes. Did you see? Okay, let me bring that back up.
No, I don't have the results.
Oh, okay. All right. So for the first question, do you feel like your hearing loss keeps you from living a meaningful and purposeful life? 22 people, and there's 46 people in the webinar as participants. 22 people said sometimes, 10 said frequently, 3 said every day.
Wow.
And 3 just said never. Do you struggle communicating with other people? 3 said never. 16 said sometimes. 15 people said frequently. And 4 people said always.
Well, thank you, everyone, for participating in the poll. I'm hoping to address the communication strategies with you in this next part and how to live a meaningful and purposeful life. Now I'm going to talk about communication strategies. There is a picture on the right that is a picture at the University of Houston. That is where I got my master's degree in human resources development, which is like instructional design, e-learning. And then I love this poster. I actually did a walk for hearing several years ago, and believe it or not, they actually hosted at the University of Houston. And what I liked about this walk for hearing, we had signs throughout campus talking about different hearing loss facts. And this one says 60% of the people with hearing loss are either in the workforce or in an educational setting. So I feel like this is very important that I'm going to address this. As far as school, I think back to my childhood, the most important thing to remember about school, I used to hate the first day of school. Every single year, I always hated the first day of school. Why? Because I'll be honest with you, because that was the day that everybody realized that I was different. Why? Because my mom always talked to the teacher ahead of time and told them that Susanna had hearing loss, and her most important stipulation was that I had to sit in the first row of class. So therefore, if you have children that are hard of hearing, I highly recommend that they sit in the first row of class. Now, I know it's embarrassing, and I also hate it when the teacher had to do alphabetical order. And once or twice that would happen, I would be in the third or fourth row, and then I would have to raise my hand and tell the teacher to remind them that I had to sit in the first row. And like I had mentioned, it was embarrassing, but I survived. I made it through, elementary, junior high, and high school. And believe it or not, when I went off to college, I made myself always sit in the first or second row when I went to school. I started out at University of Texas in Austin, and those classrooms are really, really big. And I found it instrumental to sit in the first row. But when I went off to Southwest Texas State, there was one class. I have to share an experience. I guess I did a test to myself. That teacher did alphabetical order. It was in a sales class, right? He did alphabetical order, and I was in the fourth seat in the corner. And there was the first time I did not listen to my mother's advice, or I did not listen to my own advice. I stayed in that spot, and did you know that I struggled in that class? And I made a grade that I never make. I got my first D ever in college. And you're talking to a person that usually got A's and B's, right? And I soon realized that it's important to sit in the first row of class. Another thing about that is don't be embarrassed. There's nothing to be ashamed of, because after all, you want to do well in school, because it's going to affect your ability to get a good job afterward. And you know what? I never had any life-threatening situations happen because I sat in the first row of class. So to recap school, it's really important to sit in the first row of class and make sure you talk to your teacher or your professor, or if you're a mom, make sure you talk to the teacher or professor ahead of time. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is hearing loss in the workplace. Oh my goodness. Wow, I can open up a whole can of worms, and we could probably talk for hours, and it's going to be really hard to sum up what I would like to share about in the workplace. I'm going to kind of jump ahead and talk about the telephone, because it does apply to the workplace. Just think for a second. I graduated high school back in the 80s, in college in the late 80s. This was before the internet, before text messaging. And ironically, I'm actually very good at sales. So that goes to show you I did get that bad grade in that one class, right? I really think part of it had to do with where I sit, but we moved on from that. I had no fear of job interviews, of actual face-to-face, but I hated and I dreaded picking up the phone to call that person to schedule the interview. Because back when I was a hearing aid user, I was always the type of person that was answering the question before the question was said. So for the most part, it was just being very patient. And I also found you're going to see a common theme throughout this whole presentation, that honesty is the best policy. And even to this day, I do that when I call service companies like the telephone company or whatnot. If I'm struggling in the conversation, I'll tell them I'm hard of hearing and that you need to speak slowly and clearly. And most people are very understanding. So once I crossed that bridge, I got the job interview. I often never told people I had hearing loss during the actual job interview, because once again, most interviews are done face-to-face in a quiet environment. However, once I received the job and it was the first day of work, think about it. I'm working at big department stores. It's very noisy. I have lots of employees. I want to do a really good job. So most of the time, it was always the first day or that first week. I always told my bosses and my fellow managers, my peers, and then, of course, my associates that I had hearing loss. I often just kind of waited for when the situation came up. Perhaps it got noisy in the store, or I missed somebody talking to me. And so once again, it's really, really important to tell people that you're hard of hearing, that they need to look at you when they're talking to you, to slow down, make sure they call your name to catch your attention. It may not seem like a lot, but all that is really, really important. Now, to recap, school and the workplace, like I mentioned, make sure you talk to your bosses, let them know that you're hard of hearing. And if you need any accommodation, that's also a good time to do that. I know some people like to use assistive listening devices, or back in the day, I used to get telephone amplifiers on my telephone. Once again, ask for accommodation. They're supposed to provide that for you. And think about it. It's nothing to be ashamed about, because after all, you're educating people. Family and friends. The most important thing I have to say about family is that if you're a mom or dad, or if your significant other is hard of hearing, or you have a relative, I highly recommend you don't treat them like they're extra special. Don't give them preferential treatment. I believe it helps to make you a stronger person. On the other hand, don't treat them differently just because they have hearing loss. Yes, there's going to have to be some exceptions, but for the most part, family and friends just need to treat you just like they treat everybody else. I'm blessed. My mom and dad were the most amazing people in the world. My mom was tough and she was strict, and I believe that's part of what made me very motivated and driven in life, and Dad was tough too. But I don't think I would have this life I had if I didn't have my parents. And I know some of y'all might not have a great support group. That's why you got your local hearing loss chapter. There's other hearing loss groups out there. I know you have somebody that you can talk to. It's really important. Let's go back to the next slide now. Before we talk about the active life, I failed to mention at the beginning, what I wanted to talk about is attitude. Think of attitude as at the beginning of the alphabet. Before we can do all these communication strategies, you have to think of it, you have to have a positive attitude. Why do I say that? Because if you don't have a positive attitude, then you're going to think that you can't do anything. And think about it. You know what? I like having hearing loss. Now you're going to be like, why is she saying that? Think about it. We have the best of both worlds. We can take off our hearing aids or cochlear implants at nighttime or when we're by ourselves, and we have peace and quiet. I love having peace and quiet. We live in a noisy world. I love going to bed at nighttime and having peace and quiet. Now you're thinking, well, what happens if a fire happens? Well, yes, it's true. I'm single, but I have one of those special fire alarms that vibrates and makes a lot of noise. So no worries. I enjoy it. They call it death time. I saw that on the internet, where when you get home from work and you're by yourself, you take off your ears for a little while. And you know what? You get to decompress. There's days when I work outside, when I'm in my furniture business, and I paint in peace and quiet. Then there's other days when I have my ears on and I'm walking out to some music. It depends on how I'm feeling and how stressed I am. But attitude is really, really important. And like I said, you have a big advantage over a lot of other people. There's a lot of other people that can hear really good. They tell me sometimes, I wish I can take my ears out. So positive attitude is very important. Lastly, I am going to talk about, before I did forget to talk about, before I talk about the active life, I want to talk a little bit about socializing and meeting complete strangers. I know going out in public to restaurants or a sporting event or a car race or the rodeo or even dancing, it's very, very, very noisy in those places. And when I was a hearing aid user, it was really difficult. Like I mentioned, I'm very outgoing. I like to be outside. I like to be around other people. And when I was in college, I used to, go country and western dancing, and I would hate it when people would come up to you and start trying to talk to you, and I couldn't hear them, because most of y'all have been in a dance hall or a rock concert. It is very, very noisy, and you can't hear. And once again, this is kind of like that situation of the first day of school. So I would often tell that stranger or that guy or that gal that I just met that they had to look at me when I was out in public because I need to be able to read their lips. And oftentimes, like I said, that was embarrassing at the beginning, but once we got over that initial hump, and oftentimes they would start talking in my ear because that's just the normal thing that people do when they're out in noisy places. But I would just be patient and I would just repeat my request several times that you need to tap me on the shoulder and that you need to look at me so I can read your lips out in public. Even though it was a big struggle to be out in noisy places, I wanted to be able to enjoy these things and all these activities. I didn't want to let my hearing loss stop me. And I have to tell you a really great story about that. When I was in college and I went to this country and western event, and I asked this guy to dance, right? And of course I had to tell him, but the really great thing is he became my college sweetheart. So there you go. We dated for 4 years, and just think what would not have happened if I didn't have the courage to go out in public with my hearing loss, if I didn't have the courage to tell him that I had trouble hearing in public, and if I didn't have the courage to be patient while he initially understood how to communicate with me. So it can be done. You can go out in public, but it's that thread that I've been sharing throughout this whole presentation. You have to be able to tell other people, communicate, and be honest. Now, the active life, you see lots of different pictures. That picture on the left is me snow skiing, and I'm water skiing on the bottom, and I'm showing horses, and I'm going to tell you all these different tips that I give you for doing these different activities. And then there I am running. Well, when I went snow skiing, I was a cochlear implant wearer or even a hearing aid user. I was so fearful that I'm a pretty aggressive skier. I love extreme sports, okay? So I was like, how am I going to put a helmet on? Because I don't know if you know, but if you have cochlear implants, you have this part over your ear, and then you got the magnet in this. Well, most helmets come down. Well, then that would have taken the magnet off my ear, right? And I believe in being safe. So I had somebody tell me that they make helmets with adjustable dials. So when you get helmets with adjustable dials, in other words, you can make it big when you put it on, and then you can tighten it up. But even better yet, I came up with, well, actually, I was talking to another fellow horse rider. I was like, how am I going to show horses because I have to wear a helmet? But if I put a helmet on, it's going to knock the cochlear implant off the ear. So what he suggested was that I just get a regular headband, like the headbands that you get in the hair supply at Walmart. It's a regular headband. And what I do is I put that over my head, and then I actually put it over my cochlear implant, and then I'll put the helmet on, whether it's a horse helmet, a snow ski helmet, a bicycle helmet, and I found that secures the cochlear implant or the hearing aid from losing it, because we all know how expensive this equipment is, but yet we still want to be able to have fun. So I always recommend that you get a hairband. They make them in all colors. They're not expensive. And make sure whenever you get a helmet, whether it's for snow skiing, biking, horses, any kind of helmet, you get it with an adjustable dial, and then that way you can tighten it whenever you do your athletic pursuits. Now, water skiing. Now, many of y'all don't like to go swimming or do outside sport because you have to take your ears off. Well, I grew up in a family where we loved to do water sports, and I was not about to let my hearing loss stop me. And this was back in the day when they didn't have those aqua pouches or plastic sleeves that you can put on your hearing aid or your cochlear implant. So once again, I would do these activities, and sure, I was in public schools, public pools, and I went to summer camp, but I love to do water sports. And it all goes back to communicating. Sure, I was embarrassed when some kids would come up to me and talk to me in the pool, and I would just tell them, once again, like I shared with y'all before, I'm hard of hearing. You have to look at me. I can try to read your lips. I'm here to have a great time. Hey, when we get outside of the pool, I'll talk your ear off when I get my ears back on. Horseback riding, once again, is a helmet. But I don't know if you know, but like when you take riding lessons, the instructor is usually about 25, 30, 40 feet away. And in most situations, I don't use assistive listening devices. However, whenever I do take horseback riding lessons, I have several of them. I do believe in using assistive listening devices. They're FM systems. Basically, you wear the one piece around your neck, and then your trainer or your coach wears the other piece, and it connects wirelessly. And it is the most amazing thing, because I remember when I used to take lessons without any kind of gadget, I would get really frustrated because I paid so much for these lessons, but I'm so busy looking at the trainer or the coach and not focusing on the horse, which meant we were going to make errors. Well, once I started wearing assistive listening devices, it was like night and day. I didn't have to look at the instructor, and I could just concentrate on my activity with the horse. And I will never forget one time I showed up at the barn. I didn't bring my radio, my device in, and my trainer, and he made me go back to the car and get it, because he was like, you do so much better with this. So see, there you go. I had that moment of embarrassment creeping up, and it always does that first time when I have a new trainer. And it's just something I think that most of us do, but I explain and I go on, and we all love it. And the other thing is, at horse shows, I have a special wafer that I get to use assistive listening devices when I compete. So I can compete on a level playing field, because it can be really hard to hear the announcer, and it can be very distracting. And I don't get any special, they don't treat me any different in the class. But the great thing is, like I said, having this helps me to be competitive. As far as running goes, I know most of y'all are thinking, wow, it gets really hot in Texas and you perspire. However, I went ahead and did it. I just made sure most of y'all are familiar with like dry and short kits. Just make sure you put your ears in your dry and short kits at nighttime, so that way they can dry out. And once again, if you have to wear the headband or helmet, that's really awesome. And the last picture that I didn't post a picture of is me country and Western dancing. And I have a couple of great tips to help you with that, because I don't know if y'all go country and Western dancing, but when you do the polka, it can get really, really fast. And I had it one time where my cochlear implant actually almost flew off, and I had to catch it. And so from there on, I learned two great things to do. I use Top Stick, which is 2P tape. And I basically I cut this in half. It's double-sided tape. And I put it like on this part right here. Here is two-sided, and then the other part is to my skin, so that'll help it stay on. And then also I find by having ear hooks, that also helps to make your cochlear implant or hearing aid more secure. And then you can use something like this Top Stick. And that makes me think back to my childhood, because my mom, I was very active. She used to use Scotch tape on my hearing aids to keep them from flying off. And now I know, and today they have little clips that you can hook to the back of your shirt and your hearing aid or your cochlear implant. So I hope by sharing some of these tips with you with communication strategy and the active life, that we can still live our best life in spite of hearing loss. And now I'm going to open that up to you some questions.
Okay, the first question is, or actually it's just a statement from Claudia. When you talk about, telling people that you have hearing loss, she says it can be hard if you're an introvert. So what advice would you have for her to kind of move past that?
That is a very good question, Claudia. I believe in this case, I respect people that are introverts. Let me just share, and I'm not getting sidetracked. I also teach horseback part-time, and some of my riders are introverts. However, I tell them when they're on the horse for that 30 minutes that they have to be the leader and the commander. So in this case, Claudia, I respect introverts, but in this, you're going to have to put on your leader hat. You're going to have to get some courage. And I would recommend you try it with family or friends. I would recommend you try it first with people that you know. I would recommend, that way you have that little bit of comfort because they're people you know. And then perhaps once you get comfortable doing it with people that you're familiar with, then I would try it out in public. And once again, you don't have to change your personality, but for that moment in time, you are going to have to put your leadership cap on because after all, you would like to have a great conversation or get to know that person.
That's good advice. What about when you were in school, Susanna? Sitting in the first row is okay for, hearing the teacher speak. But Darlene would like to know, what did you do when other students asked questions or joined into the discussion? How did you hear them?
That was difficult because I did not use assistive listening devices back in the day. So oftentimes I would turn around to hear what my peers had to say, but if I had a really great teacher, that teacher would paraphrase the question of what the other student asked. Yes. So they would, that the teacher, like I said, they would paraphrase what the student said and then give the answer if they were a really good teacher. Oftentimes teachers would forget, and then I struggled, or I had to piece it together, and oftentimes I would turn to see what they were doing, but I guess you can say somehow I got by. But I would recommend that if you have a child or whatnot, that you ask the teacher to paraphrase the questions, or that the student wear an assistive listening device so they can hear everything on a conference setting.
Okay. Amber would like to know, do you wait until receiving a job offer to disclose, or do you disclose during an interview? I think you said earlier that sometimes you waited until after you were on the job, which made me wonder whether you ever had coworkers or boss resent the fact that you didn't disclose it earlier. So would that be your advice, is to wait until you're on the job, or would you, in hindsight, would you maybe disclose your hearing loss ahead of time?
Everyone, this is a question to me, is still a big question. I still debate about it. Think about it. On job applications, they ask you if you have a disability, yes or no. Sometimes I answer no because I know with my ears on, and I don't want to get into that whole other conversation, but that's going to be personal. As far as, yes, I had more of a deaf speech when I had my hearing loss, and I'm sure they knew that they knew something was up, but they never asked me during a job interview. And therefore, I waited till I got the job. For some reason, I was very fearful of disclosing my hearing loss in a job interview. And once again, I want to share with everyone that my answer might not be the best fit for everybody else, but those are just my experiences. Looking back on it, I would not change the way that I go through the job interview process. Once again, I'm sure they knew, like I said, my speech is a little bit different, but of course they couldn't ask me. And I just wanted to do the interview I wanted to be presented like to level the playing field the best way that I knew how by going through the interview. And then I disclosed afterward. And I never really had any repercussions from disclosing it afterwards because they saw that I was fit to do the job that I was hired for.
Mm-hmm. That's an important point as well. And I think it probably is different for everybody, right? In this
Yes.
situation, you just have to use your best judgment. Kathleen said, "How do you deal with hearing people who talk down to you?" She said she gets yearly MRIs, and after one, a nurse realized that she couldn't hear her, and she decided she needed her to tell her how to get dressed. I mean, bizarre. But so have you ever had an experience where a hearing person kind of talked down to you, and how did you deal with that?
It happened every now and then, and I am a very proud person, and I often found that I had to, I'm very defensive. I mean, we all have areas of opportunity, and I feel like I'm a very strong personality. I believe I'm partly that way because I always had to stick up for myself with my hearing loss, and I wanted to make my way in the world. Now, on the flip side of that, it has hurt me in the workplace because I was never ever afraid to say what I wanted to say. And I've been let go from several different jobs. Now, was it partially because of my hearing loss or I get paid too much? Who knows? But once again, that's a conversation for another day. If somebody, to go back to the meat of the question, if somebody's talking down to me, I am going to address it to that person. I'm going to use it as a teaching moment, as a coaching moment. Perhaps they're not familiar with hearing loss. Think about it. We all do not know everything about every disease, illness, or disability. And you can use it as a coaching moment. It's your moment to turn a negative into a positive. Perhaps they did not know. So then that's when you tell them, kind of like I mentioned and I said several times, that you are hard of hearing and that you can treat me like most every other person. But on the other hand, you have to think about it. That person might also talk down to other people. And it doesn't have to be hearing loss. A person can be talked down to whether they have hearing loss or that person just thinks that person is not very smart or they're too short. So that's the other thing. It's just that we cannot take it personally because you don't know about that other person's experiences or what kind of opportunities or challenges that they had in their life.
Mm-hmm. Roberta said, "What recommendations do you have for practicing a clearer voice? Are there exercises that you know of, perhaps maybe some online training?"
Well, I will say this. When I was a hearing aid user, people had often told me, yes, I had more of a deaf speech with a hearing aid as a hearing aid user. However, with the cochlear implants, my speech has naturally gotten better over time, but I do a lot of speaking. I'm out in public. I'm very active, and you don't have to be hard of hearing. There's a wonderful organization called Toastmasters. It's a great way to work on your communication skills, speaking in public. And I found by having to give speeches over and over again, my speech has naturally just gotten better. And the fact that my hearing is so much better. And like I said, I'm driven. I did not do any special speech therapy. Most of my therapy, and it was just with my mom and dad, was on how to hear better. I will say this, going back to the telephone, I forgot to share. You can strengthen your hearing on the telephone by doing telephone exercises or listening to music with the words. And I just say it's just being motivated. Because I do meet others with hearing loss, and I'm amazed at how the speech can be so drastically different from one person to the other. And I think a big part of it is that I'm very motivated and I'm very driven, and that I'm going to be a success in life no matter the fact that I have hearing loss.
Mm-hmm. So Kim said, what kind of tools would you recommend for office conference calls or meetings with multiple participants? Captions come to mind.
Yes, captions, you can do captions, but I also know I would recommend you see your audiologist, find an audiologist that's really good with lots of assistive listening devices, because I have it. I just haven't used it too much, but there's when I use my FM system, you can this will be like for one person, but then they also have like a conference mic. In other words, it'll loop just a table. So that way you can put your ears in the T-coil setting and you can hear everybody in the whole room. So yes, there's lots of options out there. I just wish that audiologists and hearing aid dispensers would share a little bit more about assistive listening devices. And I don't want to turn this into a political conversation, and that's why I'm here to help you. But yes, there is wonderful tools out there to be able to hear everything at a meeting.
Okay, we have several questions to get through, so I'm going to combine two of them here.
Okay.
And both of them, M. Kelly's and the other person, owner, whoever that is, basically are frustrated with people either mumbling, talking from another room, not looking at you directly, or people that speak too loudly when they're trying to talk with you. How is it best to just keep reminding people and maybe finally get them to get it, that they need to do this all the time?
It takes a lot of patience. I also don't like when people speak really loud, because that's not necessarily making it better. Or like you said, people mumble or they have a mustache. Most of that is just patience, educating, patience, constantly reminding them. And once again, if they don't get through, you have to remember it's not about you, it's about them. They might have a bigger issue within themselves for them to be that way. So I would try educating and just patience and patience and patience. And if they're still not willing to change, do you really want that person to be in your life? Now, it's different if they're a boss. Well, they shouldn't be doing that. I mean, they shouldn't, like I said, there's a lot of different scenarios that can happen, but basically it's just patience and education.
Valor says, when you lost your hearing and became deaf, did you ever think of learning ASL?
I learned A to Z just through another one of my friends, just for something fun and to learn another language. When I went completely deaf, I never considered ASL. And once again, I'm not here to promote any particular lifestyle choices with hearing loss. My philosophy is that I grew up in the hearing world and I chose to stay in the hearing world. And once again, I'm not here to promote or advocate any one particular deaf versus deaf lifestyle. But yes, there were moments I thought about learning sign language, but then on the other hand, I was determined to make my cochlear implants work. It was not an overnight success. Lots of listening exercises, and that other key word I mentioned, patience, 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 and patience.
Mm-hmm. John Anderson asked, does your hearing loss ever cause you great fatigue? And if so, what do you do when you feel that way?
I agree with you. I do encounter great fatigue. I find when I'm often at a training session all day, if I have to go somewhere for work, I found when I worked all day in my retail job, and what I often found, and I would suffer, and I even had it where I substitute teach for a little while when I was in between jobs when I lost my job a few years ago. And oh my goodness, around all that noise and listening to the kids all day, or let's say I was going to a seminar for all day, because I have to focus, I have to pay attention to listen all day. So yes, I would have fatigue. And the first thing I did when I got home was I took off my ears, because I would have tinnitus. And for the most part, I do not have tinnitus on a day in and day out basis. But I will say, if I'm really tired, or if I had to listen hard all day long, then I would have tinnitus. And the best stress buster for me was taking my ears out, going to the gym, going running, going exercise, find whatever it is that how you like to decompress. And it's really important that you find time to decompress. I know some of y'all have families and lots of other people in homes. Perhaps you might want to tell that person, I need a half an hour to unwind, take off my ears, just to decompress, because it is very tiring, and you will sleep good that night.
Do you find that decompressing, like by going to the gym or going running, does that help with your tinnitus?
Yes.
Does it help you take your mind off of the noise that you're hearing?
Yes, I find, because I'm a type of person. I'm a type A. I'm always thinking all the time. So I find I've just gotten into the habit of, I go to the gym 3 or 4 mornings a week, just because I need to calm my brain and calm my thinking, and it calms my ears. Because, yes, to answer your question, everybody, whether they have hearing loss or not, they need to have some type of activity where they can decompress.
Mm-hmm. Bill said he had a recent problem with hyperacusis and tinnitus, where high-pitched sounds like the ones you might hear in the kitchen are really extremely loud. And then he puts earplugs in, which makes his tinnitus even worse. Do you have suggestions for that scenario?
No, I'm sorry. I really doubt. Does he already wear hearing aids or cochlear implants?
He says later in a later question that he has seen an audiologist who tested hearing, and there's some loss, but not enough to get a hearing aid yet. He had some noise trauma last July. Yeah, maybe just trying to decompress, as you said, maybe going for a walk, doing something else, getting away from the loud noise.
Yes, you have to get away from the loud noise.
Right.
I mean, you can listen to music, but just don't listen to rock music. Listen to some kind of soothing music,
Yeah, right.
Read a book. I mean, I think decompression is just important, because
Right.
I do not have tinnitus every day. When I first got my cochlear implant, the tinnitus was awful, because you have to think about it. I worked at a large department store. It was extremely noisy. And I'm going to share this one story quickly about when I first got my cochlear implant and I first went back to work. It was awful because of all the noise. My brain was trying to distinguish it. And I'm a social person. I used to go out into the mall with the other managers and eat lunch. Well, during this time, I would go out in my car and I would take off my ears because I needed to decompress for an hour. I mean, it might only be an hour, but I had to figure out a way to get through the rest of the workday. And that's what I did at the beginning. I took off my ears, and then the first thing when I got home, take them off, go running, do whatever. And eventually the tinnitus subsided over time. And now I only get tinnitus if, like the person mentioned earlier, if I'm in a class all day or it's an extremely noisy day in my life.
Claudia would like to know, how did you make it through the experience of loss or grief, and perhaps even depression after going deaf?
I will say, when going deaf, like I said, that was one of the 3 biggest events in my life, and it was devastating. And it was nice to have mom and dad there, and at that time I had horses, so I would go to the barn and ride. That was my stress buster. And I just knew I'm a very proud person, and I supported myself, and I had my lifestyle that I wanted to get back to it. So I just made up my mind that at first I did not want to do cochlear implants, but at this point, hearing aids were no longer going to work. I mean, I'm thankful for my hearing aids. They worked for that time in my life when I need them, but when you go deaf, hearing aids no longer work. I just knew that was my motivation, that I wanted to get back to my lifestyle. It was extremely difficult communicating with people. it was just insane. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I made people mad and upset, people that knew me, because, I mean, it was one thing when I had hearing aids. And when I had hearing aids, I didn't do as well with them as I did with my cochlear implants. But when you can hear, it was even more difficult. And so, like I said, I'm not going to say it was all peaches and roses, but I just prevailed. I just was determined. And when I first went back to work, I mean, when I first got my cochlear implants, and I couldn't, it was awful. I was like, what did I do? I'm never going to get my life back. But I was just patient, patience, patience, patience. The three biggest things to help you is patience, and you have got to find yourself some good people to surround yourself with. If not, get involved with HLAA. And then you have to be determined. And then that last part of that is you have to have a positive attitude. Just trust me, I still have bad days here and there, and I wonder why this happened, but you know what? I get past it, and I get over it.
Mm-hmm. How long would you say it took you once you got your cochlear implants to really get, yeah, now I really like this this implant. How long did that take you?
It was not overnight for me, Nancy. To give you and the audience, I went deaf in June of 2005. I received my first cochlear implant, I believe, in January of 2006. I got hooked up in February of 2006. I would say it took me about a good 6 months before sounds started sounding like sounds. And it was a gradual progression. I mean, and these exercises I did with my parents, we started out doing all these listening exercises. At first, I was just guessing. And just like anything else, like when you train for a marathon, I mean, you don't run 26 miles in 1 week. You have to go through a program. So it's kind of like that's what I did with the listening. And I will have to say that I ended up no longer working at that department store, and I took another job. Well, I needed that job. Well, it was the best trial by fire because all I did at that job was talk on the phone. And I talked with people from all different nationalities. And I was forced to have to learn how to hear because my survival depended on it. But overall, I'm going to tell everyone, because I read a lot of stuff where people don't have instant success with cochlear implants. It's not going to be instant, but you do have to be motivated. You have to be extremely motivated. The more motivated you are, the better you're going to do. But that's with anything in life. Anything, y'all. Anything. Like I said, whether it's running, being a teacher, anything in life. Your motivation determines how well you're going to do with anything.
Mm-hmm. I love these webinars because people often provide some tips for things that have helped them. And somebody logged in as Deaf Dog says sugar makes her tinnitus and dizziness worse. So she restricts that. And I think that's a good tip for people to take advantage of. Just look at what you're eating, and maybe restricting sugar might help you and help your tinnitus. And then she also says she attaches her processor to her eyeglasses, and then if it falls off, it doesn't fall very far.
I like that.
Very good. Okay, I think there was one other question that we have time for. In college, did you have the option to use a captioner or a cart in the classroom? I know you said that you went to school in the late 80s. That was prior to the ADA. But was that something that was available to you, or even when you went back for your master's?
I will say this, when I was in my undergrad program, yes, that was available to me, not to have cart, but I remember I could have requested a note taker. Mm-hmm. So they did have that option to where I could have a note taker in the classroom and they could take my notes for me. I just chose not to use that particular option. I felt like going back to what my mom told me, except for that one sales class, I always made sure I sat in the first row of class. And then when I went off to my master's degree, because that was after 88, yes, there were lots of more options as far as having CART and captioning and all the other wonderful devices and technology that we have. However, I'm blessed that I feel like the only device that I personally need is my FM listening system every now and then. And I still follow those rules that I shared with y'all. I always tell my professors on the first day of class that I'm hard of hearing or I need to sit in the first row, all the things that I shared with y'all earlier. But yes, y'all, if you need the technology, don't be afraid to ask for it.
Okay, and then our last question, it's right at 9 o'clock, but if you'll just say, after viewing this presentation, are you inspired to live your best life in spite of hearing loss? And it looks like it's going to be a resounding yes. So Susanna, you've done a great job tonight, and I really appreciate the time that you spent with us and answering questions and in such a candid manner. Very helpful for everybody. And as I said, it's great to see you again. And I hope that you'll consider coming to the convention, if not this year, maybe next. It will be probably closer to you in location without giving any secrets away at this point.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, but 91% said they are more inspired. So that's great. Thank you very, very much. Whitney, thank you again for providing excellent CART once again tonight. And we'll see everybody next month. Thanks so much.
Thank you.